Hi everybody, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about understanding SAR and DAR applications. If you're not familiar with the SAR and the DAR, those stand for Sons of the American Revolution and Daughters of the American Revolution. Now, after looking at our Facebook page, it seems like a lot of you know that you have Revolutionary War ancestors. Some of you, however, may not know whether or not you have Revolutionary War ancestors. You just may not have researched back that far, or you may have hit a brick wall in going back through time to find somebody in your ancestry in the 1700s living in what would become the United States as they fought the American Revolution. So some of the things that I'm going to share with you today will help you either to solidify or prove those connections to those Revolutionary War ancestors, or maybe to discover some new connections that you didn't have. Now, a couple of things just to keep in mind as we talk about what we're going to talk about today. First of all, you need to know a little bit of history. Hopefully most of you are familiar with the American Revolution. The American Revolution, the official dates are from 1775 through 1783. So those are the dates that the war was fought. So think about who in your family tree may have been alive during that period of time, likely an adult or at least in their late teens, because in order to become an SAR or a DAR member, you had to prove that your ancestor who was alive during the Revolution either fought with the Patriots or they supported the cause in some way, financially or through other efforts. So those are the things to keep in mind as you're looking for those particular Revolutionary War ancestors. Now let's talk about the SAR really briefly, the Sons of the American Revolution. In 1876, the 100th anniversary of the founding of our country, there was a group of men who decided that they wanted to form a formal organization to commemorate those Revolutionary War ancestors. They started an organization that became kind of the forerunner of the SAR, and then I wrote this down so I wouldn't get it wrong. Then in 1889, so it took a few years, the formal organization of the Sons of the American Revolution occurred. So when we're talking about applications to these organizations, those applications are going to start in 1889. So even though they're for Revolutionary War ancestors who lived in the 1700s, the applications are being made by their descendants saying, I have an ancestor who served in the Revolutionary War and this is how I descend from that person, okay? The DAR, or the Daughters of the American Revolution, is a sister organization or a similar organization. It was founded in 1890, so a year after the SAR. So again, those applications are going to start in that year, proving lineage back to an American Revolutionary War ancestor. So that's how those organizations work. If you want to learn more about either of those organizations, whether just for historical context or if you're interested in becoming a member, they do some really great volunteer work and promote a lot of education, historical education across the country. You can visit either of their websites at dar.org or sar.org. And I would encourage you to do that. Okay, with that big ol' introduction, let's dive into a couple of things we're going to cover today very quickly. First, we're just going to look at a quick way that you can see if you have Revolutionary War ancestors in your tree. Then I'm going to show you where you can find Revolutionary War documents on Ancestry.com, documents and records, and then we'll actually pull up both an SAR and a DAR record online so that we can take a look at them and I can just walk you through what information's included. Okay, let's dive in. So one of the easiest ways that I have found to pull any kind of a list or sort any kind of data to find out information about what's going on in my family tree is to use Family Tree Maker. Family Tree Maker has this fantastic filter option where I can, and as I'm typing here, if you're not viewing this presentation full screen, you might want to do that because it'll help a lot so that you can at least have some idea of what I'm doing here, even if your screen's not terribly clear. And the clarity of your screen is dependent upon the bandwidth of your internet and how you're receiving this video. So I'm going to filter in a list of all of my ancestors. So I'm just interested in my ancestors, not all the cousins or the aunts and uncles over time, but just those people from whom I directly descend. So I've got 733 of them identified here in my family tree. Now, for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to filter out all of the women because I'm looking particularly, not that the women also didn't in some cases contribute to the cause, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to be looking for a really specific subset of my ancestors. So I'm down to 380 men that I descend from. Now, I am not interested in men who were born before about 1700. Let's just make that kind of as an arbitrary date, assuming most of those men would be deceased by the time the Revolutionary War started. I'm also not interested, for the purposes of this exercise, in men who were born after the year 1768. Remember, the Revolutionary War ended in 1783. So if we just assume that young men who were 15 or 16 years old were fighting, and anybody who was born after that would not have been engaged in combat, then I can narrow this list down a little bit more. So that gets me down to 154 men. And then I'm just going to filter out any men who died before 1775. So if they, regardless of when in the 1700s they were born, if they had passed away before the start of the Revolutionary War. So what that basically does is it gives me a list of possible ancestors who would have served in or been around during the Revolutionary War. And I can just then click on any one of these to see the information. You'll notice it's applied a filter, and so it's only showing me these 134 men that I asked it to show me. Now, some of them were born outside of the United States, and if I wanted to get really crazy, I could filter out anybody born in Scotland or England or whatever. But this list is manageable for me. I can just click through on each of these, and I can see I've got quite a bit of ancestry in Virginia. Right time, right place. Those are the kinds of people that I'm going to be looking for as I do my searches. So that's how I decide or determine who it is that I'm going to be searching for as I look for information about Revolutionary War ancestors. These filter features in Family Tree Maker are terrific for doing that kind of database manipulation, not something that's easily done online. Just because of some of the limitations of online databases, but a desktop software program gives you that kind of control and flexibility. So that's how I can create that list. Now let's talk a little bit about where you're going to find Revolutionary War records on Ancestry.com. If you're not familiar with my favorite resource on Ancestry, it's found under the search button. If you just hover your mouse, don't click yet, just move your mouse. The very bottom option there is the card catalog. Go ahead and click on that, and that takes you to a list of all 30,000 plus databases on Ancestry.com. Now, I could filter by category and click over here on military, but I'm going to show you another trick today that might get you a little bit better list of databases that you might be interested in. I'm actually in the title field here in the card catalog. I'm going to type in the word revolution, and then I'm going to put an asterisk after it. That way, any database that's titled something about the revolution or something about the Revolutionary War, all of those will come up with that one search. So I've used a wildcard, which is an asterisk. I've typed the word revolution, and now I have 276 databases that I can look at that contain some kind of information about the Revolutionary War. I could then filter it by location. So I could filter down to US, and then I could even filter by state just to see what records are available, particularly for soldiers or or burials or anything that had to do with the particular location that I was interested in. Now, for today's purposes, we are interested in the Sons of the American Revolution application memberships. Here's another little trick I employ quite a bit. I'm going to right-click on that and open that link in a new tab. That way I can come play with this database, but I've still maintained this list I created. The second database we're going to look at today is this Daughters of the American Revolution lineage books. I'm going to open that in a new tab as well. Now you'll notice here we tell you exactly how many records are in each of these databases so that you can get a feel for the size. There are over 1.2 million records contained in the Sons of the American Revolution membership applications. There were not that many Revolutionary War soldiers. These records, remember, contain not just the Revolutionary War soldier, but everybody that descends from them down to, in a direct line, down to the person who made the application. So all of those names are considered a record in this particular database. And you could have an application, and we'll see that in just a minute, that has multiple names on it. So that's how come this record count here is so high. Now, the Daughters of the American Revolution database is significantly smaller, but again, you'll see here in a minute, it's because of the way that the records are counted. There's only about 140,000 or so of those records, and that's because in those, each application is considered a single record, even though the application itself may contain multiple names. You'll see why here in just a minute. Now, the other thing I would just encourage you to do before we start looking at these actual applications is just look through some of these other records. Even though some of these databases are really tiny, I mean, here's one that has 195 records. If one of your ancestors is one of those 195 people, that database is going to be valuable to you. There are also some books that have been digitized and placed in here that I read 2 of these titles over the course of the last couple of weeks because I knew I was going to be doing this presentation. One of them, let's see, I just saw it here, is called, oh, I went too far, is called A History of... Oh, I'm not seeing it here. There's a history of the Daughters of the American Revolution, like an actual history of the organization itself. And I read that because I thought that was really, not only was it interesting, but it gave me some historical context. When you start getting into genealogy, learning historical context about what's going on, about the records themselves, all of that is going to help make you a better researcher. It's going to help you come to better conclusions as you look at records, and it's going to help you understand the records that you're actually looking at. So take the time to look through some of those databases, maybe read a couple of those books or documents, and you never know what you might learn. Okay, let's take a look at these. We're going to start with the Daughters of the American Revolution. Now, the DAR has provided us, we got these records from them. Basically what it is it's a digitized version or a copy of their lineage books. There are 152 volumes. Remember, they started in 1890, so these run through 1890. Volume 152 was published in 1938. So if an application was made after 1938, and there have been, I would imagine, hundreds of thousands of those, or if not tens of thousands, then those aren't going to be included here. These are just applications made from 1890 to 1938. And the way that they have provided these to us is in a database format. So the original records themselves are not attached. So here's an example of what the record is going to look like when you get it, okay, when you do a search. Here is Mrs. Ida Bailey. This is her DAR ID number. We see here that she was born in Louisville, Kentucky. She is the wife of George Hall Wilson, and her Revolutionary War ancestor is Captain John Quixel, okay? She also has 2 more, Corporal Milner Redford and Thomas Bailey. So she made application based on the descendancy from 3 separate Revolutionary War patriots. Now, she then provides here, or the DAR has provided us with the lineage from her application. So she lists that she is the daughter of Henry Louis Bailey, who was born in 1831, and Martha Gaithright, his wife. And all of this is in relationship to the applicant, not in relationship to the Revolutionary War person, okay? So she's the daughter of Henry Louis Bailey. She's the granddaughter of this couple. She's the great-granddaughter of this couple, okay? I hope that makes sense. Until it gets back to, now she is the great-great-granddaughter of John Quicksall. Well, that's the name we saw up here as one of the people she was making application under. Then she also lists that she's the great-great-great-granddaughter of this couple. Again, that's one of the names from up here. So you start to see the descendancy, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing to make sense of because we're thinking in terms of the person that we're connected to, which may be one of these later names on the list. But always remember when you're reading these applications, the relationships are in relation to the person who made application, okay? So you may descend from an entirely different branch of the family, right? You may not share anything in common with this person other than this first ancestor listed here. And that's okay, because this is still really great information, but sometimes it gets a little confusing trying to keep track. I am a very visual, I'm also a very tactile person. And so I like to, when I read through some of these things, I usually have a pen and a notepad in hand, and I like to just scribble out what I'm seeing, draw little boxes or little pedigree charts, because it helps me put it all in context and then make sure that I've got it correct before I start transferring that information into my family tree. Now, one of the other things that you're going to want to look at as you find something here that you're interested in, notice there is a little link here. There are oftentimes multiple people who apply to the DAR or the SAR under a single ancestor. So Mrs. Ida Bailey Wilson applied, and her DAR number is listed here, but somebody else applied, and I can click on that and it takes me to Mrs. Minnie Gaithright Cook, who also applied under that same Milner Redford common ancestor. So I can see multiple applications or multiple branches of the family that descend from a common person. And while I may not be related by anything more than that single ancestor to Ida, maybe I am more closely connected to Minnie. Maybe she's a second cousin instead of a fifth cousin, right? So maybe she has more information that might be of use to me. So pay attention to that, okay? Another thing I just want to point out, there is almost always in these applications some information about the actual service record of that ancestor. So in this case here, she's listed that John Austin served as a private in Colonel Daniel Morgan's regiment of sharpshooters, fought in many battles until peace was declared. Then she even lists information about his death, his military honors at his burial, and then where he's buried. So some additional information is a lot of times included about their service, which then can lead you to further records to understand more about the battles that they fought in, who they served under, who they served with, which is a lot of times family members, brothers and cousins and whatnot. So pay attention to that. Okay, if you need more information or if you want copies of these records, remember this is just a database. The DAR is just a database of lineage books. There's always this learn more about this database link. And if you scroll down past the search box, you're going to see a database description. Here is contact information to contact the DAR in Washington, D.C. to get more information if they have it about that particular application, the applicant, or the Revolutionary War ancestor. Now, let's look at the SAR applications. These are actual paper applications that have been digitized, and so we're going to search them, and you're going to see the difference here very quickly. So Thomas Bailey, we're going to pull up an application for Thomas Bailey here. You're going to see that there's actually an original image. So I can click on that, and it takes me to this particular document. Now, these documents were all bound together in books, and so just like reading a book, you're going to want to go page by page once you find the application that you're interested in to make sure that you get all of the information off of that particular document. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2 pages, sometimes it's 3 or 4 pages. Pay attention to that. Sometimes you'll have a single ancestor or a single person who's making application for several ancestors, and so you'll have 6 or 7 or 8 pages all for that same person. Now, let's look at what you're going to find on these documents. So in this case, we have an Arthur Herbert Bailey who is making application as a descendant of Daniel Robbins and I'm not even going to be able to pronounce this name, Abiathar Robbins. He applied in 1895, and this is the information about his application itself. Okay, now if I turn the page, what I'm going to find is his lineage, right? So he says, I, Arthur Herbert Bailey, 39 years old, so now we know how old he is, am a descendant of Daniel Robbins, and then he gives information about when and where Daniel Robbins was born and died. Then he gives information about himself. Now remember, just like the DAR applications, everything that's listed here is going to be in relation to the applicant, not in relationship to the Revolutionary War ancestor. So Arthur lists that he is the son of George Bailey and Ellen Morrison Jones Bailey. He is the grandson of Ezekiel Bailey and Hannah Robbins Bailey. He's the great-grandson of Daniel Robbins and Eunice Wadsworth Robbins, Daniel being that Revolutionary War ancestor. Okay, so that's how you read these applications. Then, if I scroll down just a little bit more here, you'll see that he lists Daniel's service information. So Daniel is the ancestor who assisted in establishing American independence while acting in the capacity of a private in the militia in active service and a private in the 12th Massachusetts Regiment in the Continental Army. So he provides the specific information about what Daniel did in that service. Now you'll notice here, the very next page, so that's one application, but the very next page is still Arthur Herbert Bailey and his descendancy from Abiathar Richmond. And again, information about another Revolutionary War ancestor, the descendancy from that ancestor, and what that person did in the American independence effort. Now, in this case, there's an additional page. So rather than just a front page and a back page, we have an additional page here about that ancestor's service. And so he provides information about finding him on muster and payrolls, about what company he was in, about his exact length of service, some other information. So always look for those additional pages and make sure that you don't miss any of them. You'll see here I've turned the page again, and now here's a whole, he's typed up a really great little history here of records that he has found that detail Daniel Robbins' service in the American independence effort. So always check for those extra pages, because if that ancestor is a common ancestor to you, there is a treasure trove of historical information that will give you insight into their service to the country. So that's how you read those American Revolution SAR DAR applications. Let me just leave you with a few thoughts that will probably be really important in this effort. Remember, there are 1.3 million records in the SAR collection. That is because every person who is mentioned has been indexed and will give you the opportunity to search. As a matter of fact, if you look at these search results, let me scroll down a little bit here. You see here is a George Tilton Bailey born in 1825. Well, clearly he didn't serve in the Revolutionary War, but he is listed as one of the lines of descent on someone's application, and so he gets included there. So pay attention, and even if you don't know your Revolutionary War ancestor, if you have other people that were born after 1775 and before about 1949, you can still search for them. The Daughters of the American Revolution database, remember, it's just some digitized books. So the results are going to look a little bit different, but the information contained in them is almost identical. If you want further information, you can contact the DAR. And the way that those have been indexed, 140,000 records online, because each application is counted as a single record. Couple of just hints. Remember, their applications are made by descendants and trace their lineage back to that Revolutionary War ancestor. So even if you share no other ancestors with this person, they share a common ancestor with you, and it can still provide you with information. They may share some of their ancestry with you. Maybe it's a great uncle or a great great uncle or aunt that applied. Those are when you find real treasures, because now all of a sudden you have a lot of documentation about your ancestry there. Remember that the information in that application is only as accurate as the person who provided it. And I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but just like any other record that you find, these are clues that help tell the story. You still need to make an effort to find additional records. Collect all possible records about an ancestor. Somebody may have written a date down wrong. Somebody may have remembered something incorrectly. Sometimes even family Bibles are wrong, especially when they're recorded 20, 30, 60 years after the event. Memories tend to fade and shift a little bit. So the more records you collect, the more likely you are to have a full family story. These applications provide fantastic clues, but make sure that you're documenting the story as you go with other records as well. And then just finally, remember that there may be multiple applications that contain the same ancestor. So you could have people from entirely different branches of a single family that applied, that don't even know about each other, and now you can find them. And that might give you more information about your ancestor's Revolutionary War service. And remember to look at all the pages of those pertinent applications. Let's go page by page to scroll through them and make sure that you've got everything. And if you don't know if you have a Revolutionary War ancestor because you haven't done your research back that far yet for whatever reason, try searching for anyone born between 1775 and 1949. Remember that database for the Sons of the American Revolution goes through 1970, and I think you had to be 21 in order to apply, hence the 1949 birth date. So if you've got anyone that was born between those dates, you can search that database for them, and maybe they will lead you to a Revolutionary War ancestor you didn't even know you had. That's all I have for you today. I will be available in just a few minutes. If you're watching this live, I will be on chat to answer any questions you might have. If you're watching an archived version of this, please feel free to leave a comment here on YouTube. I do read those and will respond as I can. If you have suggestions for other topics you would like to discuss on episodes of The Barefoot Genealogist, you can email me at ask@ancestry.com. It sometimes helps if you include specific details about your research questions and challenges, just so that I understand what it is that you're looking for and can craft these presentations appropriately. Then you can check the Ancestry.com Facebook page, click on that events tab to see topics, dates, and times for future live stream presentations. I hope this has been helpful to you as you discover your Revolutionary War ancestry. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.